The acrid smell of smoke still clung to her hair when Sarah Mackenzie opened her eyes to the dawn. Ash floated down like gray snow, settling on the charred remains of what had been her family's ranch for 3 generations. The barn stood as a blackened skeleton against the pale Arizona sky, its timbers still glowing with dying embers. Everything she had known, everything that tied her to this land, had been reduced to cinders in a single night. Sarah pressed her palms against the warm earth, trying to steady herself. Her dress, once her mother's Sunday best, was torn and soiled with soot. The lace collar her grandmother had tatted by candlelight hung in tatters. She could still hear the war cries, the thunder of hooves, the screams of horses trapped in their stalls. But worse than all of it was the silence that followed. The terrible, complete silence that meant she was alone. The attack had come without warning. Chiricahua Apache. They'd set in town, pushed to desperation by broken treaties and vanishing game. Sarah had been drawing water from the well when the first riders appeared on the ridge. Her father had shoved her into the root cellar, pressing his Navy Colt into her hands before slamming the door. She'd cowered there in the darkness, listening to the chaos above, her finger on the trigger of a gun she'd never fired. Now, surveying the devastation in the growing light, Sarah knew she faced an impossible choice. The nearest town, Bitter Creek, lay 2 days' ride to the east. She could walk there, throw herself on the mercy of the townspeople who had always looked at her family with suspicion. The Mackenzies had been different. Her mother was half Mexican, her father a Scotsman who'd never quite fit in with the other ranchers. In town, she'd be the orphaned daughter of outsiders, likely bound for servitude or a hasty marriage to whoever would take damaged goods. A movement in the mesquite caught her eye. Sarah's hand went instinctively to the pistol at her waist, but her fingers trembled too much to draw it. A figure emerged from the smoke-hazed brush, tall, moving with the fluid grace of someone who belonged to this harsh land in ways she never could. He was Apache. That much was clear from his long black hair and the traditional dress, though he wore a cavalry jacket over his native shirt, likely taken from a fallen soldier. His face was weathered but not old, perhaps 30 summers, with eyes that held both wariness and something else she couldn't name. Blood seeped through a tear in his sleeve. Sarah stood frozen as he approached, stopping just beyond the reach of a desperate lunge. They regarded each other across the ruins of her life. 2 people caught in the grinding wheel of a war neither had started. "You survived," he said in accented English, his voice carrying surprise and perhaps disappointment. "The others did not think to check the root cellar." "My family," the words came out as a whisper. He shook his head once, a gesture that crushed her last fragile hope. Sarah's knees buckled, but she forced herself to remain standing. Mackenzies didn't show weakness. Her father had always said, even now, with no Mackenzies left but her. The Apache warrior studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You cannot stay here. The soldiers will come, and they will not care that you are a woman alone. They will see Apache sign and shoot first." "Where else can I go?" Bitterness crept into her voice. "Town, they'll put me in the poorhouse, or marry me off to the first man who'll take used goods." Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit caught between worlds. "There is another way." Sarah waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the destruction. Her mother's rose garden, lovingly tended through years of drought, was nothing but trampled stems. The old cottonwood where she'd spent countless hours reading was split by fire, its ancient trunk weeping sap. The warrior seemed to come to a decision. He straightened, his hand moving to rest on the knife at his belt, not threatening, but formal, as if preparing for a ceremony. "My name is Kuruk. It means bear in my tongue. I lost my wife and son to the Bluecoats' bullets at Camp Grant. My mother says I must take another woman. Start again, or I will die of the emptiness inside." Sarah's breath caught. She understood emptiness, understood the howling void where love used to live. Among my people. Kuruk continued, his English careful and deliberate. A man can offer protection to a woman who has no family. She becomes his responsibility, his to shelter and feed. In return, he paused, seeming to search for words that wouldn't offend. In return, she keeps his fire, bears his children, stands beside him. The full weight of what he was suggesting crashed over Sarah like a flash flood. Her hand found the porch post, or what remained of it, for support. You're asking me to... I am offering you life, he said simply. Out there, he gestured toward the desert. You are prey. With me, you would be Apache. It is not an easy life, but it is life. Sarah thought of her grandmother, Maria Esperanza, who'd scandalized 2 communities by marrying outside her people. She'd died when Sarah was 12, but not before filling her granddaughter's head with stories of the old days, when Apache and Mexican traders had mingled freely before borders and blood divided them. Her grandmother had taught her words in languages her parents forbade, shown her which plants could heal and which could harm. Why? Sarah asked. Why would you offer this to an enemy? Kuruk's lips curved in what might have been a smile. Are you my enemy? You did not ride with the soldiers who poisoned our water holes. You did not sign the papers that stole our hunting grounds. You are just a woman who has lost everything, as I am a man who has lost everything. Perhaps 2 broken things together make something whole. The logic was simple, brutal in its honesty. Sarah looked down at her hands, still stained with ash and dirt. In town, these hands would wash other people's clothes, scrub other people's floors, until some man decided she was worth the trouble of feeding. Here, now, she was being offered something else entirely, dangerous, uncertain, but chosen rather than imposed. I don't speak Apache, she said, testing the boundaries of his offer. You will learn. Your people will hate me. Some will. Others will see you prove yourself. My mother will decide if you stay or go. Sarah took a deep breath, tasting smoke and possibility. And if I say no? Kuruk shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass the burned ranch, the empty desert, the circling vultures that had begun to gather. Then I leave you to your choice, but choose quickly. The smoke will bring soldiers by noon. She closed her eyes, seeing her father's face in those last moments, fierce with love and terror as he pushed her to safety. He'd want her to survive, by any means necessary. Her mother would understand the price of crossing between worlds, and her grandmother. Her grandmother would probably laugh and say it was fate. When Sarah opened her eyes, Kuruk was still waiting, patient as the desert itself. She thought of all the proper responses a white woman should give, all the outrage and fear she should feel. Instead, she felt only a strange calm, as if she'd been walking toward this moment her entire life. If I come with you, she said slowly, I choose it freely. Not as a captive, not as property. As your woman, yes, but by my own choice. Something flickered in Kuruk's dark eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. In my culture, women own the homes, the children, the right to divorce. You would have more freedom than your own laws allow. Sarah almost laughed at the irony. She looked one last time at the ruins of her old life, then squared her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Then yes, I'll come. Kuruk nodded once, as if they'd concluded a business arrangement. We must go. Can you ride? Since I was 4. Good. He whistled, a low, carrying sound, and 2 horses emerged from behind a cluster of burned wagons. One was clearly Apache trained, small and sturdy. The other was her father's mare, Rosalie, who must have broken free during the attack. Sarah's eyes burned with sudden tears at the sight of the familiar gray coat, the white star on the mare's forehead. Rosalie whickered and came to her, nuzzling her shoulder as if to say she understood. She was ready for whatever came next. As Sarah gathered what few possessions she could salvage, her grandmother's silver cross, her mother's medicine bundle hidden beneath a loose floorboard, the navy coat that had been her father's. She felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She was about to step out of one world and into another, with no possibility of return. Karuk waited by the horses, his injured arm now roughly bandaged. When she approached, he didn't help her mount. Apache women, she would learn, were expected to be as capable as men. Instead, he simply watched as she swung up onto Rosalie's back, her torn skirts hiking up to show her boots and stockings. "We ride hard until noon," he said, mounting his own horse with fluid grace despite his injury. "Then rest through the heat. Ride again at dusk. Can you manage?" Sarah gathered the reins, feeling the familiar leather against her palms. "I'm a Mackenzie," she said, not sure if the name meant anything anymore. "We manage." As they turned their horses toward the mountains, Sarah allowed herself one final glance back. The sun had fully risen now, turning the ruins of her home into a shimmer of heat and memory. Somewhere in that devastation lay her past, her parents, everything she had been. But ahead, beyond the mesquite and sage, lay something else entirely. Not better, necessarily, not easier, but chosen. She nudged Rosalie forward, following Karuk into the vast uncertainty of the desert, into a life she could never have imagined when she woke to her mother's call just yesterday morning. The smoke of her old world rose behind them, a gray column marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. The sun had climbed to its merciless peak when they finally stopped at a hidden spring tucked between red rock formations. Sarah slid from Rosalie's back, her legs trembling from hours of hard riding. Her throat was parched, her skin burned despite the bonnet she'd salvaged from the ruins. Karuk had set a brutal pace, speaking only to warn her of dangerous terrain or to change direction. Now, as their horses drank deeply from the small pool, he turned to face her fully. The cavalry jacket was gone, revealing the traditional Apache shirt beneath, decorated with beadwork that caught the light. His wound had reopened during the ride, fresh blood seeping through the bandage. "Let me tend that," Sarah said, reaching for her grandmother's medicine bundle. Karuk's hand shot out, catching her wrist, not roughly, but firmly. "First, we must speak of what comes next." Sarah pulled her hand back, settling on a flat stone across from him. The spring gurgled between them, a tiny oasis in the vast desert. She waited, aware that everything depended on these next moments. "You agreed to come," Karuk began, his English more halting now, as if the formality of the moment required careful words. "But agreement in fear and agreement in understanding are different things. Before we reach my people, you must know what you accept." "I'm listening." He studied her for a long moment. "Among the Apache, marriage is not your church ceremony. A woman comes to live with a man, and if both agree, she stays. If not, she leaves. Simple. But you are not Apache. The people will test you, some will reject you, my mother most of all." "Tell me about her." "Dala is her name. It means flower. But do not let that deceive you. She has buried 2 husbands and 3 sons. She leads the Women's Council. Her word can cast you out, no matter what I say." Sarah absorbed this information, thinking of her own grandmother's iron will hidden beneath soft words. "And if she rejects me, then you cannot stay as my woman. Perhaps someone else would take you, or you would live as a captive servant. It is not what I offer, but I cannot promise what I cannot control." The blunt honesty was somehow reassuring. Sarah had grown up in a world of pretty lies and social facades. This harsh truth felt cleaner. "What else?" she asked. Karuk shifted, seeming to choose his words with care. "There is the matter of tonight." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. She wasn't a child. She understood what marriage meant, what sharing a man's blankets entailed. Her mother had explained such things with clinical detachment. preparing her for an eventual wedding night that would never come. "You said be my woman tonight when you found me," she said carefully. "What did that mean?" His dark eyes held hers steadily. "Among my people, first night together is, how do you say, declaration. If a woman shares a man's blankets willingly, she announces her choice. The band sees, accepts, or not. But the choice is made clear. And if I'm not ready for that declaration, then you sleep apart, and the people wonder why I bring a white woman if not for that purpose. They think me weak, or you unwilling. Neither helps your acceptance." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the spring's edge. The water reflected the harsh sun, sending dancing lights across the red rocks. She thought of the alternatives, the poor house in Bitter Creek, a forced marriage to secure her survival, years of servitude and shame. Here at least was honesty, choice, even if the choice was constrained by circumstance. "I need to know," she said without turning, "what kind of man you are. You offer protection, partnership, but some men's protection is another kind of cage." She heard him rise, his footsteps careful on the rocky ground. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the desert air. "My wife's name was Ayana, Eternal Bloom. She spoke her mind, rode to hunt, sat in council with the men when she chose. I never raised hand or voice to her. When she died," his voice caught slightly, "when the soldiers shot her at Camp Grant, she was running to protect our son, not cowering behind me. She died as she lived, free and fierce." Sarah turned to face him, finding him closer than expected. This near, she could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes, the grief that matched her own. "I offer you the same," he continued. "Partnership, not ownership, respect, not domination. My protection when you need it, my distance when you do not. This is the Apache way with women. Can your people say the same?" She thought of her mother, brilliant and educated, reduced to keeping house because society demanded it. Of her grandmother, who'd lived between two worlds and been fully accepted by neither. Of herself, with no rights to the ranch she'd helped build, no legal recourse now that her father was gone. "No," she admitted, "they cannot." Karuk nodded, stepping back to give her space. "Then you understand. Tonight, when we reach the band, I will go to my wiki-up. You may follow or not. If you follow, it is your declaration. If not, I will say you are grieving. Need time, but time is short. The band moves constantly now. Fleeing soldiers. They will not wait long to accept or reject you." Sarah returned to her seat on the stone, pulling out her grandmother's medicine bundle. "Now let me tend that arm, declaration or not. I won't have you dying of blood poison before we get there." He submitted to her ministrations without protest, watching with interest as she cleaned the wound with water and applied a poultice of crushed herbs her grandmother had taught her to prepare. "You have healing knowledge," he observed. "My grandmother was Maria Esperanza Delgado before she married. She learned from her grandmother, who learned from—" Sarah paused, then made a decision. "Who learned from Apache healers, when the border was just lines on maps that no one paid attention to." Karuk's eyebrows rose slightly. "You have Apache teaching in your blood. Diluted, forgotten, forbidden, but yes. This changes things. Dala will want to know this. It may help." As Sarah rewrapped his arm with strips torn from her petticoat, she felt the weight of the moment settling around them. Every choice led to another, each step taking her further from the world she'd known. "There's something else," Karuk said as she finished. "My name. You must learn to say it properly. Kuruk." He pronounced it slowly, the sounds rounder and deeper than her English tongue naturally formed. "And you cannot be Sarah there. Too white, too hard for our tongues. You need an Apache name." "What would you call me?" He considered her, taking in her dark hair, a gift from her Mexican mother, her sun-browned skin, her steady gaze. "It's Achu," he said finally. "Star and Morning." You survived the night of fire to greet the dawn. It fits. It's a chew, Sarah repeated, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. Close. We will practice as we ride. They remounted as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The landscape had changed, becoming rougher, more vertical. Hidden trails wound between towering rocks, paths invisible unless you knew where to look. Your people, Sarah asked as they rode. Where are they now? 3 hours, maybe 4. Hidden Valley the soldiers have not found, yet. The last word carried weight, the constant pressure of pursuit, the knowledge that each safe haven was temporary. How many? 40, maybe 45. Once we were hundreds. Now. He shrugged, the gesture encompassing all the loss and diminishment of his people. They rode in companionable silence for a while, Sarah practicing her new name under her breath. The desert came alive as the heat faded. Lizards skittering across rocks, a hawk circling overhead, the distant yip of coyotes. As purple shadows lengthened across the landscape, Karuk suddenly held up his hand. Sarah reined in, instantly alert. He dismounted silently, motioning for her to do the same. They led their horses into a cluster of boulders just as she heard what had alarmed him. Voices, speaking English, coming closer. Tracks lead this way. Sergeant, 2 horses, 1 shod, 1 not. Sarah's heart hammered as she pressed against Rosalie's neck, willing the mare to stillness. Through a gap in the rocks, she glimpsed blue uniforms, the glint of rifles. Karuk had vanished. One moment he was beside her, the next he was simply gone, melted into the landscape like smoke. Sarah held her breath, her hand on the Navy Colt at her waist. Could be survivors from the Mackenzie place, another voice said. That or Apache scouts. Same difference. If you ask me, any white woman riding with Apache is no better than... The soldier's words cut off in a gurgle. Sarah caught a flash of movement, heard a brief struggle, then silence. The other soldiers shouted, shots rang out, but they were firing at shadows. In the chaos, Karuk reappeared at her side. Ride, he commanded, now. They burst from cover at full gallop, Karuk leading down a trail Sarah could barely see in the gathering darkness. More shots echoed behind them, but the soldiers' horses couldn't match their pace on the treacherous terrain. They rode hard for another hour, doubling back, crossing their own trail, using every trick to confuse pursuit. Finally, Karuk led them through a narrow canyon that seemed to dead end at a solid wall, only to reveal a hidden passage at the last moment. On the other side, firelight flickered against canyon walls. Sarah's first glimpse of the Apache camp stole her breath. Wickiups arranged in careful order, people moving about their evening tasks, children playing despite everything. It was a scene of domestic normalcy, made poignant by its fragility. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Women looked up from their work. Men reached for weapons. Children ran to announce the strangers. And through it all, Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes, measuring, judging, deciding. Karuk dismounted and helped her down, the first time he'd offered such assistance. A statement, she realized. A public claim. An older woman emerged from the largest wickiup, and Sarah knew immediately this was Dala. She moved with the authority of someone used to obedience, her gray-streaked hair bound in traditional style, her face weathered but unbroken. Mother and son spoke rapidly in Apache, Dala's eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The conversation grew heated, gestures sharp, until finally Dala stepped forward. So, she said in accented English, my son brings home a white woman on the day our enemies burn our neighbors. Interesting timing. Sarah lifted her chin, meeting the older woman's fierce gaze. My family was among those burned. I have no one left. And so you take up with their killers? I take up with those who offered life instead of servitude. Dala circled her slowly, taking in every detail. You ride well. You tend wounds. What else? I can shoot, hunt, work cattle. I know some healing plants. My grandmother was Maria Esperanza Delgado. Dala stopped. Delgado. I knew an Esperanza once, traded with us before the wars. Good woman, dead now. These 10 years. Dala completed her circle, stopping before her son. They exchanged more words in Apache. Then Dala switched back to English. You will stay in the Unmarried Women's Wiki-Up tonight. Tomorrow, we see what you can do besides ride and bandage. Then perhaps we talk about whether you stay at all. Sarah felt Karuk tense beside her, but before he could protest, Sarah spoke. I thank you for the chance to prove myself. Dala's eyes narrowed, perhaps surprised by the response. Then her weathered face cracked into what might have been a smile. We shall see. It's a true. We shall see. As Dala walked away, Karuk touched Sarah's elbow lightly. She tests you. The Unmarried Women's Wiki-Up is... I know what it is, Sarah interrupted softly. A test of my intentions, and yours. Whether you'll respect their customs even when it delays what you want. He looked at her with something like admiration. You understand. My grandmother taught me that understanding is survival. Around them, the camp settled into evening routines. The smell of cooking filled the air, along with smoke and sage. Sarah noticed how the people moved, always alert, possessions minimal and portable, ready to flee at a moment's notice. This was life on the edge of extinction, and she was asking to join it. A young woman approached, perhaps 16 or 17, with curious eyes and a shy smile. She spoke to Karuk, who translated. This is Nayeli. She will show you to the Women's Wiki-Up, help you settle. Her name means, I love you. Her parents were romantic sorts. Nayeli giggled at something Karuk added in Apache, then gestured for Sarah to follow. As Sarah gathered her few possessions, Karuk caught her hand briefly. Tomorrow night, he said quietly. I will ask again. The choice remains yours. Sarah squeezed his fingers once before letting go. Tomorrow night, she agreed. As she followed Nayeli through the camp, past cook fires and playing children, past warriors cleaning weapons and women working hides, Sarah felt the last of her old life falling away like a shed skin. Sarah Mackenzie had died with the ranch. Tomorrow, Itzachu would begin to live. The question was whether she would survive the transformation. The Unmarried Women's Wiki-Up smelled of smoke, sage, and tanned hide. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of quiet movement as the other women began their day. Her body ached from sleeping on the ground, wrapped only in a thin blanket Nayeli had provided. Around her, 3 other young women were already rising, their movements efficient and practiced. Nayeli touched her shoulder gently. Come, morning water duty. Sarah followed the women to the spring. Heavy clay pots balanced on their heads. She struggled with the unfamiliar weight, water sloshing over the rim, earning amused glances from the others. By the 3rd trip, her neck and shoulders screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and continued. You carry water like a baby bird, one of the women said in careful English. She was perhaps 20, with intelligent eyes and calloused hands. I am Siki. It means friend. I'm learning, Sarah replied, adjusting the pot yet again. Learning is good, but learning fast is better. Here, watch. Siki demonstrated the proper posture, the steady gait that kept the water from sloshing. The soldiers come closer each season. Only the useful survive. After water duty came food preparation. Sarah's experience cooking on the ranch served her well here, though the ingredients were different mesquite beans to grind, agave hearts to roast, pine nuts to gather. She watched carefully as the women prepared a stew of rabbit and wild onions, memorizing which plants they selected from the gathered stores. Dala appeared as the sun climbed higher, observing Sarah's work with the grinding stone. The older woman said nothing, but Sarah felt the weight of her judgment as flour dust covered her already dirty dress. Your grandmother's teachings. Dala said finally. Show me. Sarah wiped her hands and retrieved her medicine bundle. Under Dala's watchful eye, she identified each herb, explaining their uses. When she came to a particular dried root, Dala's expression shifted. Ghost medicine, the older woman said. Few remember its use now. Your grandmother taught you well. She pointed to a woman working nearby, favoring her left leg. Itzel hurt her knee in yesterday's move. Show me how you would treat it. Sarah approached Itzel carefully, asking permission in her limited Apache vocabulary before examining the swollen joint. She prepared a poultice, explaining each step to Dala, then wrapped the knee with strips of cloth. It should ease by evening, Sarah said. Dala made a non-committal sound. We shall see. The day continued in a blur of tasks, learning to scrape hides, failing miserably at basket weaving, succeeding somewhat better at repairing torn clothing. The women spoke around her in rapid Apache, occasionally translating when necessary. Sarah caught perhaps one word in 10, but she listened intently, trying to map the rhythm and flow of the language. At midday, she noticed Karuk across the camp, working with the horses. He glanced her way once, a question in his eyes, but made no attempt to approach. The separation was deliberate. She understood, a test of patience and respect for both of them. He watches you, Siki observed, following Sarah's gaze. This is unusual. Karuk has been like a dead man since Camp Grant. Now he wakes up. Tell me about Camp Grant, Sarah said quietly. Siki's face darkened. No, that story is not mine to tell. But know this, he was different before, laughed more. The man you see now is only half of who he was. As afternoon shadows lengthened, a commotion arose at the camp's edge. Scouts had returned with new soldier patrols were sweeping the canyons to the south. The camp would need to move again, possibly that night. The women immediately began packing with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched in amazement as entire households were condensed into portable bundles. Wickiups came down in minutes, their poles and coverings secured for travel. She tried to help but mostly got in the way, until Nayeli showed her how to pack cooking utensils in a specific pattern that maximized space. How often do you move? Sarah asked. When we must, Siki replied. Sometimes daily. Sometimes we find a place for a moon or two, but always ready, always watching. As she worked, Sarah felt eyes upon her. Turning, she found a small girl, perhaps 6 years old, staring at her with unabashed curiosity. The child said something in Apache, and the women laughed. She asks if your pale skin washes off in water, Nayeli translated, smiling. Sarah knelt before the girl. No, but I wish it would sometimes. It burns too easily in the sun. The girl reached out tentatively, touching Sarah's hair where the sun had bleached it lighter. She seemed fascinated by the color variation, so different from the uniform black of Apache hair. Her name is Shadi, Siki explained. It means singer. Her parents are gone. Dala raises her now. Sarah's heart clenched, recognizing a fellow orphan. She pulled a ribbon from her hair, one of the few pretty things she'd salvaged, and offered it to Shadi. The girl's eyes went wide with delight. She scampered away, showing her treasure to the other children. That was well done. Dala's voice came from behind. But ribbons do not make a mother. Sarah stood, meeting the older woman's gaze. No, but kindness costs nothing and weighs nothing when we must run. Dala almost smiled. Come, there is something else you must learn. She led Sarah to where the women were preparing ammunition, not just for rifles, but traditional weapons as well. Sarah watched as they fletched arrows, the work precise and delicate. Every Apache woman knows this. Dala said, in battle, warriors need arrows more than food. Can your soft hands learn? Sarah had helped her father make cartridges for his rifles, understanding the careful measurement of powder, the precise seating of bullets. This was different but not entirely foreign, Under Dala's instruction, she learned to split feathers, to bind them with sinew, to balance the shaft. Her first attempts were clumsy, the arrows crooked and useless, but by the 10th, she had found the rhythm. Dala inspected her work critically. Not good, but not hopeless. Continue. As Sarah worked, she became aware of a shift in the camp's atmosphere. The initial suspicion was giving way to curiosity, especially among the women. They began including her in their conversations, code switching to Spanish occasionally when her Apache failed. She learned their names, their relationships, the subtle hierarchies that governed camp life. When the sun touched the western peaks, Itzel approached, walking normally. "Your medicine worked," she said simply. "Dala wants you to know." It was a small victory, but Sarah felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps she could earn her place here after all. As darkness fell, the camp prepared for possible flight. Horses were kept close, packs arranged for quick loading. Children were fed early and put to bed fully clothed. The mood was tense but not panicked. This was routine for them. Sarah realized this constant readiness for displacement. After the evening meal, Kuruk finally approached the women's area. He spoke formally to Dala, who listened with crossed arms. They conversed at length, their voices rising and falling in what seemed like negotiation. Finally, Dala turned to Sarah. "My son reminds me that you rode here of your own choice, not as a captive. He says you have proven yourself willing to work, to learn. He asks if you will continue your learning as his woman rather than as an unmarried girl." Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Around them, the camp had gone quiet, everyone pretending not to watch while watching intently. "What do you say? Mother Dala?" Sarah asked, using the formal title she'd heard others employ. Dala's eyebrows rose at the address. "I say you are soft, but not weak, ignorant, but not stupid. You could learn our ways, given time, but time is what we lack." She paused, studying Sarah's face. "I say the choice is yours, as it should be. But know this, if you share my son's wiki up tonight, you are Apache. There is no road back to your white world. They will see you as ruined, as traitor. Is one man worth such a price?" Sarah thought of the smoking ruins of her home, of the soldiers who had assumed any white woman with Apaches was fair game. That world had already rejected her the moment she'd ridden away with Kuruk. "With respect, Mother Dala, I have no world to go back to. The question is whether I'm worthy of going forward into yours." A murmur ran through the watching crowd. Dala and Kuruk exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. "Then go forward," Dala said finally. "But know that sharing blankets is easy. Sharing a life of running, fighting, watching your children hunger, that is the true test. Tonight begins your real learning." She turned and walked away, the crowd dispersing with her. Sarah stood alone with Kuruk for the first time since morning, aware that everything had changed yet again. "You did well today," he said softly. "Dala is not easily impressed." "I made bad arrows and spilled water." "You tried. You learned. You showed respect." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "The invitation stands, but I would have you know, if soldiers come tonight, we must flee. Our first night might be on horseback, running under stars. This is not what I wish to offer." Sarah looked around the camp, at the patient horses, the ready packs, the children sleeping in their clothes. This was the life she was choosing. Not some romantic dream of noble savages, but a harsh reality of survival against overwhelming odds. "I've slept in softer beds," she said quietly. "But I've never slept free. Show me your wiki up, Kuruk. Let me learn what freedom costs." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and steady. Together they walked through the camp, past the dying cook fires, past the sentries already taking their positions. His wiki-up was small but well ordered, weapons properly stored, blankets neatly folded, a few personal items arranged with care. Sarah recognized the hallmarks of someone who'd learned to live with loss, keeping only what truly mattered. "Your home," she said, touching the center pole. "Our home," he corrected gently, "if you choose it." Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of evening, mothers singing children to sleep, men discussing watch rotations, horses snorting and stamping. But inside the wickiup, the world narrowed to just the two of them, standing at the threshold of something neither fully understood. "I choose," Sarah said simply. And somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, whether in warning or welcome. She couldn't say, but Kuruk drew her inside, and the flap fell closed behind them, sealing her choice. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought: flight, hardship, the constant dance with death. But tonight, Itzachu would learn what it meant to be chosen and to choose in return, to step fully into a life shaped by courage rather than convention. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, while in the Apache camp, a new story began to unfold. The months that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain. Sarah learned to mark time not by calendar days but by the rhythms of survival, new moon to new moon, cache to cache, one narrow escape to the next. Her hands, once suited for needlework and piano keys, grew calloused from scraping hides and grinding mesquite. Her Spanish-inflected English gave way to halting Apache, each new word a small victory. "No, no," Siki corrected her for the 100th time. "Kodo, not Kado. You just said firefly instead of antelope. Unless you plan to hunt fireflies for dinner." The women around the grinding stones laughed, but it was warm laughter now, inclusive rather than mocking. Sarah Itzachu, as she thought of herself more each day, laughed with them. "Perhaps fireflies would be easier to catch," she replied in her improving Apache, earning appreciative chuckles. She had found her place among the women, though it hadn't come easily. The first weeks were a trial by endurance, when soldiers forced them to abandon camp in the dead of night. She learned to pack a household in minutes, to mount a horse in darkness while carrying a terrified child. When food grew scarce, she learned which roots could fill an empty belly, which cactus fruits were worth the thorns. The women taught her through action more than words. Itzel showed her how to find water by watching the flight patterns of birds. Nayeli demonstrated the art of making pemmican that would last through long flights. Even sharp-tongued Siki became a patient teacher when Sarah proved willing to fail and try again. But it was from Dala that she learned the most. Kuruk's mother had moved from suspicious observer to exacting instructor, seeming to take grim satisfaction in pushing Sarah to her limits. "You waste too much hide here," Dala critiqued, examining Sarah's attempt at making moccasins. "Cut closer to the edge. Leather is life. We cannot afford waste." Sarah nodded, starting again. Her feet had long since worn through her ranch boots, and successful moccasins meant the difference between mobility and lameness. Under Dala's sharp eye, she learned not just the craft but the philosophy behind it. Use everything, waste nothing. Beauty comes second to function. The children had been her first allies. Little Shadi, who still wore the faded ribbon in her hair, had appointed herself Sarah's Apache language tutor. The lessons consisted mainly of pointing at objects and repeating words until Sarah's pronunciation satisfied the 6-year-old's exacting standards. "Besh," Shadi said, holding up a knife. "Besh," Sarah repeated. No besh. The child's frustration was comedic in its intensity. "Besh." "Better. Now say, 'The knife cuts the meat.'" Sarah mangled the sentence so badly that Shadi collapsed in giggles, and even passing warriors smiled at the scene. Through it all, Kuruk remained a steady presence. Their relationship had deepened from desperate alliance to something richer, built on small moments of understanding. He taught her to read sign language in broken twigs and disturbed stones, to move silently through thorny mesquite, to shoot a bow when ammunition ran low. In return, she shared her grandmother's stories, her knowledge of Mexican remedies that complemented Apache medicine, her ability to read and write that proved useful when they needed to decipher captured army dispatches. At night in their wickiup, they talked in whispers, sharing histories and hopes. Karuk told her about his first wife, Ayana, speaking her name now without the raw pain that had once accompanied it. "She would have liked you," he said one evening as Sarah mended his war shirt. She also had sharp tongue and soft heart. "Tell me about your son," Sarah said gently. It was the one subject he rarely broached. Karuk was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Bidzil, it means he is strong. But he was small. Only 3 winters. He tried to run when the soldiers came to Camp Grant. His legs were too short. His voice broke slightly. "I should have carried him. Should have been there." Sarah set aside her sewing and took his hand. "You were hunting, providing food. You couldn't have known." "The heart doesn't care for logic," he replied, but he squeezed her fingers gently. These glimpses beneath his stoic exterior were precious, paid for with her own revelations. She told him about finding her mother crying over letters from her family in Mexico, begging her to leave her white husband and come home, about her father's drinking when cattle prices fell, the way fear made him mean, about her own dreams of studying medicine like her grandmother, dreams considered unfit for a proper lady. Here, healers are honored regardless of gender. Karuk said, "Perhaps you find your dream in a different shape." Indeed, Sarah's medical knowledge had become one of her greatest assets to the band, working alongside Dala. She learned to blend Apache and Mexican healing traditions. When a warrior returned with a festering wound, she cleaned it with tequila they'd traded for, then applied Apache poultices. When children fell ill with fever, she used willow bark tea supplemented with her grandmother's prayer rituals. Not every patient could be saved. The day she lost her first, a young mother who hemorrhaged after childbirth despite everything Sarah tried, she understood the weight Dala carried as the band's primary healer. "You did all that could be done," Dala said, finding Sarah sobbing behind the wickiups. "Death chooses its time. We can only fight to delay it." "I should have. Should have is a luxury we cannot afford," Dala interrupted, not unkindly. "Learn, yes. Grieve, yes. But do not drown in what might have been. The living need you." It was the first time Dala had suggested Sarah's permanence, that she was needed beyond Karuk's desire to keep her. Sarah treasured that acknowledgement like a physical thing. As spring gave way to summer, Sarah realized she could no longer imagine any other life. When she caught her reflection in still water, she barely recognized herself. Her skin had darkened to deep brown, her hair now worn in traditional style. The Apache dress Siki had helped her make moved with her body in ways her constraining ranch clothes never had. More than physical changes, her entire way of thinking had shifted. She found herself scanning horizons automatically, reading weather signs, conserving energy for the next crisis. The constant vigilance that had once exhausted her became second nature. One evening, as the band rested in a temporary camp, Sarah noticed unusual activity among the warriors. Karuk had been in council all day, his expression grave when he finally returned to their wickiup. "What is it?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "The army builds a new fort 2 days' ride from here. They bring many soldiers, big guns. Some of the young men want to attack before it is finished." "And you?" He shook his head. "It is foolishness. We are too few, but they call me coward. Say I think too much of my white woman to fight white soldiers." Sarah felt the sting of that accusation, knowing how it must wound his pride. "What will you do?" "Try to speak wisdom. If that fails," he shrugged, the gesture encompassing the inevitable tragedy of young men desperate to strike back at their oppressors. That night, the debate raged around the council fire. Sarah couldn't follow all the rapid Apache, but she understood the passion, the frustration, the need to do something besides run and hide. When one young warrior, Nalnish, pointed at her while making his argument, She knew she was being used as evidence of Karuk's compromised loyalty. Karuk responded with controlled fury, and for a moment Sarah feared violence would erupt within the band itself. But Dala rose, her presence commanding instant attention. She spoke at length, her voice carrying the authority of years and loss. When she finished, even Nalnish looked subdued. The council dispersed without resolution, but the immediate crisis had passed. "What did she say?" Sarah asked Siki later. She reminded them that Apache strength has always been in choosing battles wisely, that dead warriors protect no one, and Siki smiled slightly, that anyone who questioned her son's courage could test it personally if they wished. No one took that offer, but the tension remained, especially as summer heat drove both soldiers and Apache to compete for scarce water sources. Twice they narrowly avoided army patrols, saved only by the scouts' vigilance. The constant pressure wore on everyone's nerves. It was during this time that Sarah made an unexpected friend. Guyen, whose name meant wise, was the band's most respected female warrior. She rode with the men on raids, her skill with weapons legendary. Sarah had been intimidated by her, but one day Guyen approached as Sarah practiced with her bow. "You hold it like you're afraid it will bite." Guyen observed. "Here." She adjusted Sarah's stance, her grip, the draw of her arm. Under her tutelage, Sarah's accuracy improved dramatically. "Why help me?" Sarah asked after a particularly good shot. Guyen considered the question. "You could have stayed with your people. Safe, maybe comfortable. Certainly, instead you choose this." She gestured at the harsh landscape, the temporary camp. "That takes a warrior's heart, even if your body is still learning." As they practiced together regularly, Guyen shared her own story, how her first husband had been killed by Mexican soldiers, how she'd taken up weapons to avenge him, how she'd earned her place among the warriors through skill and determination. "They accept me now," she said, "but acceptance is earned daily, never permanently won." Sarah understood that truth in her bones now. Every day she had to prove herself anew, had to demonstrate that she belonged through action rather than words. It was exhausting and liberating in equal measure. One scorching afternoon, as the band prepared for another move, Sarah noticed Karuk watching her with an odd expression. She was helping load pack horses, her movements now efficient and practiced. "What?" she asked in Apache, barely conscious of the language switch. "I watch my wife," he said simply. Apache wife, no longer white woman trying to be Apache. The distinction mattered more than any elaborate declaration of love. That night, despite the hard travel ahead, Sarah felt a contentment she'd never known in her previous life. She belonged here, had earned her place through sweat and adaptation. But even as she celebrated this internal victory, she noticed Dala's worried expression as she consulted with the scouts. The old woman's face, usually stoic, showed genuine concern. "What troubles your mother?" Sarah asked Karuk quietly. "The scouts report soldier movements from 3 directions. They seek to trap us against the canyon walls. We must move fast and far. Maybe split the band." Sarah's heart sank. Splitting the band meant weakening it, making each group more vulnerable. But staying together might mean annihilation if they were caught in the closing net. As they prepared for what could be their last night in this camp, Sarah helped Dala pack the medical supplies. The older woman worked in silence for a while, then spoke. "You have learned well. It's a true, if something happens to me, you could tend the people." "Nothing will happen to you," Sarah said firmly. Dala's smile was sad and knowing. "We all walk with death, but knowledge should not die with us. Remember, Apache medicine is not just herbs and poultices. It is strength of spirit, will to survive. Never forget." That night, as the band prepared for a grueling forced march, Sarah looked around at the faces that had become family. Siki sharpening knives with grim efficiency, Nayeli soothing frightened children, Shadi clutching her ribbon like a talisman, Guyen checking weapons with practiced ease. These were her people now, for better or worse. Tomorrow would bring new dangers. The constant dance with annihilation that defined Apache existence in these years. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. As Karuk took her hand to lead her to their packed horses, Sarah sent a silent prayer to whatever spirits watched over this harsh land. Not for safety, that was too much to ask, but for strength to face whatever came with the courage her adopted people had taught her. The stars were bright as they rode out, the band moving like ghosts through the desert night, and Sarah rode with them, no longer a refugee but a full member of the band, carrying her share of both burden and hope into an uncertain dawn. The harvest moon hung full and orange above the canyon rim, casting long shadows across the ceremonial ground. Sarah watched from her place among the women as the drummers began their ancient rhythm, the sound echoing off red rock walls like a heartbeat. Tonight was special. The band had found temporary refuge in a hidden valley with fresh water and good hunting, allowing them to hold the first proper ceremony in months. "Stop fidgeting," Siki whispered, adjusting the feathers in Sarah's hair. "You look like a Apache woman now. Be proud." Sarah touched the soft doe-skin dress Dala had presented to her that morning, beautifully beaded with patterns that told the story of her adoption into the band. The gift had left her speechless, understanding the hours of work it represented, the acceptance it symbolized. "My hands won't stop shaking," Sarah admitted. "Good," Guyen said from her other side. "Ceremonies should make us tremble. Shows the spirits we take them seriously." The men entered the circle first, Karuk among them, wearing his finest war shirt and moving with the controlled grace Sarah had come to love. His eyes found hers across the fire, holding a promise for later, when the formal dancing gave way to couples stealing away into the shadows. But first came the honoring. Dala rose, her voice carrying over the drums as she called forth those who had distinguished themselves. Warriors who'd led successful hunts, women who'd found new water sources, children who'd shown bravery during the hard moves. Then, to Sarah's surprise, Dala called her Apache name. "Itzachu, star in morning, come," on unsteady legs. Sarah made her way to the circle's center. The firelight danced across watching faces, some still skeptical, but many now warm with acceptance. "This woman came to us from ashes," Dala announced. "White by birth, Apache by choice. She has learned our ways, speaks our tongue, heals our sick. Tonight, we acknowledge what has already become truth. She is one of us." Dala produced a small leather pouch, decorated with porcupine quills and tiny silver conchos. "This was my mother's medicine bag. I give it now to Itzachu, our new healer, to carry our traditions forward." Sarah's eyes burned with tears as she accepted the gift, understanding its significance. Dala was publicly naming her as apprentice healer, a position of respect and responsibility. "Speak," Dala commanded gently. Sarah's Apache was still imperfect, but the words came from her heart. "I thank the people for teaching me strength, for showing me freedom. I promise to use these gifts to serve, to heal, to stand with you in all things." The drums resumed, louder now, and the formal dancing began. Sarah returned to her place, clutching the medicine bag, overwhelmed by the honor. She'd come so far from the terrified girl who'd ridden away from her burning home. As the night progressed, the mood shifted from formal to joyous. Warriors performed feats of athleticism, competing good-naturedly. Women sang traditional songs, their voices blending in harmonies passed down through generations. Children darted between adults, stealing food and affection equally. "Dance with me." Karuk appeared at her elbow as the couples' dances began. They moved together around the fire, their steps synchronized through months of partnership. Other couples joined, Nayeli with her new husband, even Stern Guyen with her latest suitor. The night hummed with life and possibility. "You honor me," Karuk said quietly as they swayed. "Dala's gift means the people accept you fully. This is rare for an outsider." "I'm not an outsider anymore," Sarah replied, meaning it completely. His smile was answer enough. Later, as the ceremony wound down and families drifted to their wiki-ups, Sarah and Karuk walked to the stream. The moonlight turned the water to molten silver, and somewhere an owl called, its voice echoing off canyon walls. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said, her heart racing with different nerves now. Karuk waited, patient as always. "I've missed my monthly bleeding, twice now, and this morning I couldn't keep food down." His whole body stilled. In the moonlight, she watched emotions chase across his face: surprise, hope, fear, joy. "You carry a child?" "I believe so. Dala confirmed the signs today, before the ceremony. That's why she gave me the medicine bag now. She wants me fully trained before I'm too heavy to gather medicines." Karuk pulled her against him, his embrace fierce yet gentle. She felt him tremble slightly, this warrior who faced death without flinching, undone by the promise of life. "After Bidzil, I thought never again," he whispered into her hair. "The pain of loss." "I know." Sarah held him tighter. "But this child is hope. For us, for the band. Dala says babies born between worlds often become bridges." They stood by the water, planning in whispers. Names if it was a boy. Names if a girl. How to protect the child in their uncertain life. Whether to seek refuge in Mexico when Sarah grew too pregnant to ride hard. The others must not know yet. Karuk decided, "Not until you show. Too many have lost babies early. Hope disappointed becomes bitter." Sarah agreed, though keeping such news secret would be difficult in their close quarters life. They returned to camp hand in hand, hearts full of dreams neither fully dared voice. The next weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt precious for its ordinariness. Sarah threw herself into learning from Dala, absorbing everything about pregnancy herbs, birthing positions, infant care. The knowledge was both practical and deeply personal now. Her body began its subtle changes: tender breasts, heightened senses, a bone-deep exhaustion that made the daily work harder. Only Siki seemed to notice, catching Sarah's eye one day with a knowing look but saying nothing. It was during a gathering expedition that everything changed. Sarah was with the women, harvesting piñon nuts in a grove they'd found untouched. Shadi helped her, the little girl chattering about the feast they'd have with their bounty. The attack came without warning. One moment they were laughing at Shadi's joke. The next, gunfire erupted from the ridge above. Not soldiers, worse. Civilian bounty hunters, collecting Apache scalps at $50 each. No questions asked about age or gender. "Run!" Guyen shouted, grabbing her rifle. "Back to camp." But they were cut off, forced sideways into a box canyon. Sarah clutched Shadi, shielding the child with her body as bullets whined overhead. Her mind raced. Where was cover? How many attackers? Where were their warriors? Guyen and 2 other women laid down covering fire, but they were outnumbered 3-1. Sarah saw Itzel fall, blood blooming across her chest. Nayeli screamed, cradling her sister's body. "This way!" Sarah spotted a narrow crack in the canyon wall, possibly wide enough for escape. She pushed Shadi ahead, then helped the other children through. The women retreated step by step, Guyen's ammunition running low. That's when Sarah saw him, a bounty hunter circling around, trying to flank their position. He'd have a clear shot at the fleeing children. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen woman's bow, knocked an arrow, and let fly. The arrow took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. His shot went wild, but his cursing alerted his companions. More gunfire concentrated on their position. "Go!" Guyen shoved Sarah toward the crack. "Take the children, we'll hold them." "Not without you." "That's an order." Guyen's voice brooked no argument. "Save the future." Sarah hesitated 1 heartbeat more, then squeezed through the crack, on the other side. She gathered the terrified children, forcing her voice calm. "We run now, silent like rabbits. Hold hands. Don't let go." She led them on a nightmare flight through twisted arroyos and thorny mesquite, guided by instinct and desperation. Behind them, the gunfire intensified, then gradually faded. Sarah's heart broke for what that silence might mean, but she couldn't stop, couldn't look back. Hours later, they stumbled into a scout patrol from their band. The warriors' faces went grim as Sarah gasped out what had happened. Within minutes, a war party rode out while others escorted Sarah and the children back to camp. The wailing began before the warriors returned. The women knew, had always known, how such stories ended. When the bodies were brought back, Itzel, 2 others, but miraculously not Guyen, who'd survived though badly wounded. The camp exploded in grief. Sarah helped tend Guyen's wounds, tears streaming as her friend recounted the battle, how they'd held off 9 bounty hunters long enough for the children to escape, how Itzel had died protecting her younger sister, how the hunters had tried to take scalps before the war party arrived. "You did well." Guyen gripped Sarah's hand weakly. "Quick thinking saved the little ones." But Sarah felt no pride, only hollow loss. That night, as the death songs rose to the stars, she curled against Karuk and finally told him her deepest fear. "I'm changing them," she whispered. "My presence makes them targets. Those hunters might have passed by Apache women, but a white woman with them? That's a story. That's extra money." "Stop," Karuk said firmly. "Evil men need no excuse for evil acts. You saved children today. You fought for the people. This is who you are." But the seed of doubt was planted. Over the following days, as the band mourned and moved to safer ground, Sarah caught suspicious glances from some who'd never fully accepted her. Nalnish spoke openly about the danger of harboring whites, though Dala silenced him with scorching words. The stress and grief took its toll. One morning, Sarah woke to cramping pain and the dreaded sight of blood. Despite Dala's herbs and her own desperate prayers, she lost the baby before the sun reached its peak. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. Sarah lay in the wickiup, keening softly while Karuk held her. Another loss, another failure, another sign that perhaps she didn't belong here after all. "The child was not ready for this world," Dala said gently, cleaning away the blood. "Sometimes spirits look down and decide to wait for safer times." "There are no safer times," Sarah said bitterly. "No," Dala agreed. "But there is always hope for tomorrow." Sarah wanted to scream that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford, that tomorrow only brought more loss. But she held her tongue, understanding that Dala spoke from her own deep well of grief. In the days that followed, Sarah moved like a ghost through camp routines. She tended wounds, gathered plants, cooked meals, all mechanically. The other women gave her space to grieve, understanding the particular pain of lost possibilities. It was little Shadi who finally broke through Sarah's numbness. The girl approached with a small buckskin doll, crudely made, but precious. "For your sadness," Shadi said solemnly. "When my mother went to the spirit world, Dala gave me this, said it could hold my tears until I was ready to let them go." Sarah pulled the child close, both of them crying for their different losses. In that moment, she understood something crucial. Her grief was not unique here. Every woman in camp had lost children, siblings, parents, husbands. Loss was woven into the fabric of their existence, but so was the determination to continue. That night, she sought out Karuk where he sat sharpening arrows, preparing for the eternal vigilance their life required. "I want to try again," she said quietly. "When my body heals, I want to bring life into this world, despite everything." He set aside his work, studying her face. "You're certain the pain will be worth it if we succeed, and if we fail, at least we'll have tried to build something beyond survival." Karuk pulled her down beside him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. More running, more loss. more impossible choices. But tonight, they had each other and the stubborn hope that love could bloom even in the harshest ground. The ceremony fire had long since died to embers, but Sarah felt its warmth still in the medicine bag at her waist, in the memory of acceptance, in the knowledge that she'd found her place, even as that place shifted like sand beneath her feet. She was Apache now, for all that meant the joy and sorrow, the freedom and fear, the constant dance between life and death. And despite everything, she wouldn't trade it for the false safety of her former world. Here, she was truly alive. The winter had been kind to them, by Apache standards. Hidden in the Sierra Madre foothills, the band had enjoyed 3 months without running, time enough to repair weapons, cure hides, and let the children play without constant fear. Sarah's body had healed from her loss, and with spring's arrival, her heart had begun to heal as well. Now, as cottonwoods budded along the stream, she knelt beside Dala, helping deliver Nayeli's first child. The young woman gripped Sarah's hand, breathing through another contraction while Dala murmured encouragement. "Almost there," Sarah said in Apache, checking the baby's position. "One more push with the next pain." The infant emerged in a rush of fluid and blood, a perfect girl who announced her arrival with lusty cries. Sarah cleaned the baby's face, checked her breathing, then placed her on Nayeli's chest. The new mother wept with joy and relief. "You did well," Dala told Sarah as they cleaned up. "Your hands grow more confident." It was high praise from the demanding teacher. Sarah had assisted with 6 births now, each one teaching her something new about the balance between intervention and letting nature work. As she emerged from the birthing wickiup, Sarah found Karuk waiting with barely concealed anxiety. She smiled, knowing what he wanted to ask. "Mother and child are well. A girl, strong lungs." His shoulders relaxed. Since Sarah's miscarriage, he'd been protective to the point of irritation whenever she was around pregnant women, as if loss might be contagious. She understood the fear but refused to let it rule her. "The scouts report army movement to the north," he said, switching to practical matters. "We may need to move again soon." Sarah sighed. 3 months of peace had made them all soft. Too comfortable. But comfort was a trap for Apache people. That evening, as the band celebrated the new arrival with quiet songs and shared food, Sarah noticed unusual activity among the men. Riders had come from another band, bringing news that set faces grim. She caught fragments of conversation. Reservation, surrender, Geronimo. Later, in their wiki-up, Karuk explained. "Some bands are talking of going to the reservation. They say the fighting is hopeless, that our children deserve a chance to grow old." "What do you think?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I think of Bid Zil. Would he be alive if we'd surrendered sooner? But then I think of the stories from those who tried reservation life. Sick food, no hunting, children stolen for white schools. Is that life?" Sarah had no answer. The mathematics of survival grew more impossible each season. Stay free and die by bullets, or surrender and die by degrees. "What does Dala say?" "She says each must choose their own path. Some families talk of Mexico, others of surrender. The band may split." The thought chilled Sarah. The band was her family now. The idea of it fragmenting felt like another loss to mourn. Over the following weeks, the debate intensified. News trickled in, another band wiped out. A successful raid that brought temporary plenty but guaranteed harsh retaliation. Stories of reservation Apache dying from bad water and despair. Sarah threw herself into work, trying not to think about futures that all seemed dark. She helped Siki prepare for her wedding, gathered medicines with Dala, played with Shadi and the other children. Normal life, shadowed by approaching change. It was during a medicine-gathering trip that her own future shifted again. Sarah had wandered from the other women, following a streak of yellow flowers that might be good for fever. The morning sickness had caught her by surprise. She'd thought it was just worry over the band's divisions. But as she retched behind a juniper, Counting days in her head, she knew. Her monthly bleeding was late again, her breasts tender, her sense of smell overwhelming. Joy and terror warred in her chest. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Guyen said, appearing silently as was her way. Sarah wiped her mouth, trying to compose herself. "Just something I ate." Guyen's knowing look said she wasn't fooled. The sickness that comes with sunrise is rarely about food. "How long?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. "Does Kuruk know?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure." Guyen nodded. "Smart. But don't wait too long. Men need time to adjust their thinking from warrior to father." That night, Sarah planned to tell him, but shouting erupted from the council fire before she could speak. Nalnish and several young warriors faced off against the older men, voices raised in anger. "Cowards!" Nalnish spat. "You would have us crawl to the white man, beg for scraps. And you would have us all die for your pride," an elder shot back. The argument escalated until Dala stood, her presence commanding silence. "Enough. We are one people, whatever path we choose. Those who wish to seek the reservation will not be called cowards. Those who choose to remain free will not be called fools. Each must follow their heart." But the damage was done. Over the next days, the band began to separate like a slowly tearing cloth. 2 families packed for the reservation. Nalnish and his followers spoke of joining Geronimo's raiders. Others planned for Mexico. "What will we do?" Sarah asked Kuruk as they watched friends say tearful goodbyes. "I follow Dala. She speaks of finding others who think like us, not surrendering, but not seeking war either, survival through invisibility." "And I follow you," Sarah said simply. Then, before she could lose courage, "All of us." He frowned, not understanding. Sarah took his hand, placed it on her still flat belly. "The child I carry, we follow you." The emotions that crossed his face were almost painful to watch. Joy crashing into fear, hope wrestling with memory of loss. Finally, he pulled her against him, his voice rough. "When?" "Autumn, if all goes well. We'll find somewhere safe by then, I swear it." But safety proved elusive. The band, now reduced to 25 souls, moved constantly through the summer heat. The army seemed to be everywhere, driving Apache bands like rabbits before hounds. Twice they barely escaped encirclement, saved only by Guyen's scouting skills. Sarah's pregnancy progressed despite the hardships. Dala monitored her carefully, adjusting her duties as her belly grew. The other women rallied around her, sharing their own pregnancy stories, making small clothes from precious fabric scraps. "Apache babies are tough," Siki assured her as they rode through another blistering day. "They learn strength in the womb." Sarah hoped it was true. The constant motion, irregular meals, and stress couldn't be good for the child, but she'd learned to trust her body's resilience, to find reserves she hadn't known existed. By late summer, her condition was obvious to all. Kuruk had become almost comically protective, trying to shield her from any exertion while she stubbornly maintained her duties. Their gentle arguments provided entertainment for the band. "I can still gather plants." Sarah insisted one morning. "The plants will be there tomorrow. Rest." "I rested yesterday." "You walked 5 miles yesterday." "That is rest compared to our usual pace." Dala interrupted their debate. "Let the woman work while she can. Soon enough she'll be confined." It was during a plant-gathering expedition that disaster nearly struck. Sarah was with Guyen and Shadi, filling baskets with medicinal roots, when they heard horses approaching. Army horses, by the sound of shod hooves on stone. Guyen reacted instantly, pushing Sarah and Shadi into a shallow cave hidden by hanging vines. "Stay silent," she hissed, then vanished into the landscape. Sarah held Shadi close, hand over the child's mouth, as voices grew closer. American voices, casual and confident. "And orders are to clear every canyon. The colonel wants no Apache left south of the border." "Waste of time, if you ask me." They're like smoke. See 'em one moment, gone the next. The horses passed within feet of their hiding spot. Sarah's heart hammered so loud she was certain they'd hear it. Shadi trembled against her, but stayed silent as death. After eternal minutes, the soldiers moved on. Guyen reappeared, her face grim. They're sweeping in force. We must warn the others. They ran as fast as Sarah's condition allowed, reaching camp just as scouts brought the same news. The band packed with desperate efficiency, fleeing deeper into the mountains. That night, exhausted and heartsick, Sarah felt the first real contraction. Too early, she thought frantically. The baby wasn't due for another month, but her body had its own timeline, triggered by stress and exertion. It's starting, she told Kuruk, trying to keep panic from her voice. His face went ashen, but he simply nodded, alerting Dala. The older woman examined Sarah with gentle hands, her expression carefully neutral. Early, but not dangerously so. We need to find shelter. They couldn't stop long. The army was too close, but Dala insisted on finding a defensible spot with water. As Sarah labored through the night, warriors stood guard, ready to fight if discovered. The contractions built slowly, each one stealing her breath. She bit down on leather to muffle any sounds, aware that a cry of pain could bring death to them all. Kuruk stayed beside her, letting her crush his hand, whispering encouragement. "You're the strongest woman I know," he said as another pain gripped her. "Our child will be strong like you." Dawn was breaking when the urge to push became overwhelming. Dala positioned her, Siki and Nayeli supporting her shoulders. The pain was beyond anything Sarah had experienced, but she embraced it, knowing it brought life. With a final effort that felt like it would tear her apart, the baby emerged. For a heart-stopping moment, silence, then a thin wail that was the sweetest sound Sarah had ever heard. "A son," Dala announced, cleaning the infant with practiced efficiency. Small but fierce. Sarah reached for him with trembling arms, tears streaming as she counted fingers and toes. He was perfect, wrinkled and red, but perfect. Kuruk touched the baby's head with wonder, his warrior's hands impossibly gentle. "His name?" Dala asked. Sarah and Kuruk exchanged glances. They'd discussed this, planning for either outcome. "Bidani," Kuruk said firmly. "He who helps others, may he bridge worlds." "Bidani," Sarah repeated, offering her breast to the searching mouth. "My little bridge." But there was no time for extended joy. Scouts reported soldiers closing in. Sarah had to be lifted onto a travois, too weak to ride. The band moved out as the sun climbed, the newborn's cries muffled against her chest. The next days blurred together, constant movement. Sarah fighting to heal while nursing a demanding infant. Everyone tense with the knowledge that they left an easy trail. Bidani, bless him, seemed to understand the need for quiet, crying only when hungry. On the fourth day, salvation came from unexpected quarters. A Mexican trader they'd dealt with before found them, bringing news and an offer. "There's a valley 2 days south," he said in Spanish that Sarah translated. "My brother has a ranch there, needs workers. He doesn't care if you're Apache. Long as you work, could hide you till the worst passes." It wasn't ideal. Working for wages went against every Apache instinct. But with a newborn and winter approaching, survival trumped pride. "We'll consider it," Dala said through Sarah. That night, the band council was brief. The choice was stark. Keep running with a woman still healing and a newborn, or take shelter that might be a trap but offered hope. "We go to the valley," Dala decided, but ready to flee if needed. As they prepared for what might be their last free journey, Sarah held Bidani close, whispering promises. He would know his heritage. She swore, even if they had to hide, to pretend, to survive in shadows, he would know who he was. Apache and white, bridge between worlds, hope for a future none of them could yet imagine. Kuruk wrapped them both in his arms as stars emerged overhead. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight they were together, alive, and blessed with new life despite everything trying to destroy them. "He's beautiful," Kuruk murmured, touching the baby's cheek. "He's hope," Sarah replied. And in that moment, it was enough. The Mexican rancher's valley had seemed like sanctuary for 3 precious months. Hidden in Sonora's folds, the band had worked the ranch, tending cattle and horses while maintaining their language and customs in private. Baby Bidani had grown round and healthy, his first laughs bringing joy to people who'd forgotten the sound. Sarah should have known it couldn't last. The attack came at dawn, swift and merciless. Not Mexican soldiers, who generally left them alone, but American cavalry who'd crossed the border in hot pursuit of raiders. It didn't matter that this band hadn't raided in months, that they were peaceful workers. Apache was Apache to the Buffalo Soldiers. Sarah woke to gunfire and screaming. Kuruk was already up, reaching for his rifle as their wickiup exploded in splinters. She clutched Bidani, rolling to shield him as bullets tore through the air where they'd been sleeping. "The cave," Kuruk shouted, referring to their predetermined escape route. "Go!" But as Sarah stumbled into the chaotic dawn, she saw it was already too late. Soldiers were everywhere, cutting down runners with mechanical efficiency. The rancher who'd sheltered them stood on his porch, counting money. He'd sold them out for bounty. Sarah Guyen appeared through the smoke, blood streaming from a scalp wound. "This way!" They ran toward the horse corral, Bidani wailing against Sarah's chest. Behind them, the sharp crack of rifles mixed with screams and war cries. She caught glimpses of horror, Nayeli falling with her infant daughter. Old Naki shot in the back as he tried to surrender. At the corral, Kuruk and 3 other warriors held the soldiers back while women and children mounted whatever horses they could grab. Sarah barely had time to swing onto a mare before more soldiers appeared from the east. "Ride," Kuruk commanded. "Make for the border mountains." "Not without you." "I'll follow, Go." There was no time to argue. Sarah kicked the mare into motion, clutching Bidani with one arm while trying to guide the terrified horse. Around her, the remnants of the band scattered like quail before hawks. The pursuit was relentless. Sarah's horse labored under the double weight, foam flying from its mouth. She could hear hoofbeats behind, gaining beside her. Siki rode with grim determination, her young son clinging to her back. Then Siki's horse stumbled. Sarah watched in horror as her friend pitched forward, the child flying from her grasp. Siki hit the ground hard and didn't move. Her son scrambled to her still form, crying. Sarah hauled on the reins, torn between escape and loyalty. But soldiers were already surrounding the fallen pair. She saw the sergeant raise his pistol, heard the shot that silenced the child's cries. Bile rose in her throat as she forced her mount onward. The chase continued for miles, horses dying under their riders, the band fragmenting further with each twist of the canyon. Sarah lost sight of the others, focused only on keeping Bidani safe and her horse moving. Finally, as the sun reached its merciless peak, her mount stumbled to a halt, sides heaving. Sarah slid off, legs barely supporting her. They were in a narrow canyon, temporarily hidden but far from safe. Bidani fussed weakly, exhausted from crying. Sarah sank against a boulder, opening her shirt to nurse him, though fear had nearly dried her milk. As he fed, she assessed their situation. No food, no water, no weapon, no idea where the other survivors might be. A shadow fell across her. Sarah's heart stopped, then resumed as she recognized Dala. The older woman looked ancient, her face carved with new lines of grief. "How many?" Sarah whispered. "Too many. Naki, Nayeli and her baby, Siki and little Tasso. Others I couldn't see." Dala's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "The men still fight, trying to buy time." More survivors trickled in over the next hour. Guyen, despite her wound. Shadi, clinging to a teenage boy who'd saved her. 2 other women with children. pitifully few from a band that had numbered 25 at dawn. "We can't stay here," Guyen said, her practical nature asserting itself despite everything. "They'll track us." "Where can we go?" one woman asked desperately. "They chase us even into Mexico now." Before anyone could answer, horses approached. Everyone tensed. But it was Karuk and 2 warriors, all wounded but alive. Sarah's relief was so intense she nearly fainted. The soldiers pulled back. Karuk reported, sliding from his horse to embrace Sarah and Bidani. For now, they got what they wanted, a body count for their report. "Where are the others?" Dalla asked. Karuk's silence was answer enough. They moved deeper into the mountains, a ragged remnant of 9 adults and 4 children. No supplies, wounded, traumatized. That night, huddled in a cave without fire. The enormity of their loss hit fully. "We cannot go on," one of the warriors said. "Look at us. We're already ghosts." "We live," Dalla countered firmly. "While we breathe, we fight." "Fight with what?" Nalnish, who had somehow survived when better men died, gestured bitterly at their empty hands. "We have nothing." "We have ourselves," Sarah said quietly. All eyes turned to her, some still resentful of the white woman who'd brought soldiers, or so they believed. "We have knowledge, skills, the will to survive. That's not nothing." "Pretty words," Nalnish spat. "Your people did this. Maybe if we give you to them." Karuk's knife was at Nalnish's throat before he could finish. "Speak such dishonor again and join your ancestors." "Stop," Dalla commanded. "We tear ourselves apart while our enemies laugh. Itzachu is Apache. She has proven this with blood and birth. Anyone who challenges this challenges me." The cave fell silent except for Bidani's hungry whimpers. Sarah fed him again, grateful for even this small normalcy. As the others gradually slept, she and Karuk kept watch. "He's not wrong," she whispered. "My presence endangers everyone." "Your presence saved Shadi today. Your medicine knowledge has saved others. Stop this guilt. It serves nothing." But guilt gnawed at her through the long night. How many had died because soldiers found a white woman worth pursuing? Would Siki be alive if Sarah had never come to them? Dawn brought harsh reality. They had to move, but to where the Mexican rancher would report their direction. American soldiers ignored borders when chasing Apache. Their old sanctuaries were compromised or destroyed. "I know a place," Guyen said slowly. "My mother's people. Yaqui. They might shelter us if we can reach them. It's far, maybe 10 days walking. 10 days through desert and mountain with wounded. Children. No supplies. It seemed impossible, but staying meant certain death. They began the terrible journey, traveling at night, hiding through scorching days. Sarah's milk began to fail from lack of food and water. Bidani cried constantly, his wails dangerous but unstoppable. On the 3rd night, Shadi collapsed. The little girl burned with fever, her small body consuming itself. Sarah used what few herbs they'd gathered, but without proper medicine. She could only ease suffering, not cure. "Sing for me," Shadi whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah sang the Apache lullaby Dalla had taught her, tears streaming as Shadi's breathing grew shallow. The child died as dawn broke, still clutching the faded ribbon from their first meeting. They couldn't spare time for proper burial rites. Karuk and another warrior hid the small body in a crevice, covering it with stones while Dalla sang the death song. Another piece of innocence lost to an impossible war. The days blurred together, thirst, hunger, the constant fear of discovery. 2 more died before they reached Yaqui territory, the teenage boy who'd saved Shadi, and one of the women who simply lay down and refused to rise. When Guyen's relatives found them, Sarah barely recognized their rescuers as human. She herself must have looked like a skeleton. Bidani frighteningly still in her arms, though still breathing. The Yaqui took them in warily. Apache and Yaqui had complex history, sometimes allies, sometimes enemies. Always cautious, but kinship obligations held. They were given food, water, shelter, and most importantly, anonymity. Sarah's first coherent memory after collapse was waking to find a Yaqui healer tending Bidani. The woman spoke Spanish, explaining she was feeding him goat's milk since Sarah had none left. "He's a fighter," the healer said. "Like his mother." Sarah wept then, great gulping sobs for all they'd lost, all the dead left behind, all the tomorrows that would never come for those she'd loved. Recovery was slow. The Yaqui were kind but clear. The Apache could stay until healed, then must move on. Their own situation was precarious, caught between Mexican and American pressures. Karuk spent long hours staring at nothing, the weight of survival crushing his spirit. So many warriors lost, so many failed responsibilities. Sarah could only hold him through the darkness, knowing words were useless against such grief. It was Dala who rallied them, as always. Despite losing almost everything, she began planning. Where to go, how to live, whether to attempt finding other Apache bands or disappear entirely into Mexican society. "We could claim to be Mexican," she said one evening. "Some of us can pass, learn the ways, hide in plain sight." "And lose ourselves completely," Nalnish argued, though his fire had dimmed. "Become tame dogs begging for scraps." "Living dogs," Dala countered, "with children who might see better days." The debate continued nightly. Sarah listened, nursing Bidani, who grew stronger on goat's milk and mashed beans. Her son would live, but what kind of life hidden, denied his heritage, forever running? One night, Karuk spoke privately with her. "The Yaqui healer has cousins in a mining town. They need a curandera. You could go, take Bidani, be safe." "Without you? I'm too Apache to hide, but you could pass for Mexican, raise our son without constantly running." Sarah understood what this offer cost him, to lose his son as he'd lost Bidzil, but by choice this time, for safety. "No," she said firmly. "We stay together or not at all. Bidani needs his father, I need my husband." Relief and anguish warred in his eyes. "It may mean his death, our death. Then we die as a family, but I think we find a way, maybe not the old way, but a way nonetheless." The next morning brought unexpected hope. A trader arrived with news. American soldiers had withdrawn across the border. Satisfied with their body count, Mexican authorities, embarrassed by the incursion, were offering quiet amnesty to peaceful Apache who would settle in designated areas. It wasn't freedom, not really, but it was a chance. After much discussion, the survivors decided to accept. They would become officially Mexican, take Spanish names, practice Catholicism publicly while keeping Apache ways privately. A death of sorts, but perhaps also a transformation, as they prepared to leave Yaqui territory for their new lives. Sarah held Bidani up to see the sunrise. He gurgled happily, unaware of all he'd already survived. "See that little bridge?" she whispered. "That's tomorrow coming. We'll meet it together." Karuk joined them, his arms encircling both, around them. The remnant of their band gathered, Dala organizing as always, Guyen checking weapons she hopefully wouldn't need, Nalnish silent but present. They were so few now, but they were alive, and where life persisted, so did hope. The Apache might fade from maps and official records, but in hidden valleys and quiet homes, the stories would continue, the language would whisper, and children like Bidani would carry the blood of warriors into an uncertain future. Sarah thought of all they'd lost. Friends, family, a way of life stretching back generations. The grief would never fully heal, but as Bidani reached for his father's face, babbling in sounds that might someday be words in 2 languages, she found strength for another day's journey. They walked into exile singing softly, not death songs, but mourning songs, the ones that welcome new days despite everything. and Sarah sang with them, her voice joining the ancient melodies. A white woman who'd become Apache just in time to help them become something else entirely. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to human sorrow, and they walked on. The mining town of San Miguel squatted in the valley like a dusty afterthought, its adobe buildings baking under the Sonoran sun. Sarah, now Maria Delgado to any who asked, adjusted the weight of her medicine bundle as she walked the familiar path to the market. 20 years had carved lines around her eyes, turned her hair silver at the temples, but her step remained sure. "Buenos dias, Doña Maria," called the baker's wife. "How is your son?" "Well, gracias. He returns from the university next week." The woman beamed. "Such a smart boy, you must be proud." Sarah smiled and continued on. Yes, she was proud. Bidani, now known as Daniel, had grown tall and strong, with his father's keen intelligence and her stubborn determination. The scholarship to study law in Mexico City had been a blessing neither of them had dared dream of in those desperate early years. She entered her small shop, breathing in the familiar scent of dried herbs and tinctures. The sign outside read "Curandera" in faded letters. Over 2 decades, she'd built a reputation as a healer who succeeded where others failed, though she was careful never to seem too knowledgeable, too different. As she prepared for the day's patients, her mind drifted to Karuk. 10 years now since the fever took him, one of many claimed by the epidemic that swept through the mining camps. She'd fought death for him with every skill she possessed, but some battles couldn't be won. He'd died with Apache words on his lips, her name the last Itzachu. The bell above her door chimed. Sarah looked up to find old Nalnish, now called Ignacio, supporting his grandson who clutched a bloodied arm. "Caught it in the mine gear," Nalnish explained in Spanish, though his eyes spoke in Apache. Sarah went to work, cleaning and stitching the wound with practiced efficiency. As she worked, she studied Nalnish. He'd survived when so many hadn't, adapting to town life with surprising grace. The fire that once burned toward war had banked to embers, glowing mainly when he told the old stories to any who would listen. "There," she said, tying off the bandage. "Keep it clean. Come back in 3 days." Nalnish paid with worn pesos, then paused at the door. "Dala sends word. Tonight." Sarah nodded, understanding. Once a month, the survivors gathered in secret, keeping traditions alive in whispers and shadows. Dala, now in her 80s, presided over these meetings with unchanged authority despite her frail body. The day passed in a blur of patients' mining injuries, childhood ailments, women seeking herbs for various needs. Sarah treated them all with equal care, her reputation protecting her from the questions a woman alone might otherwise face. As twilight painted the mountains purple, she closed her shop and made her way to the abandoned mine shaft that served as their meeting place. The others were already there. Dala, Nalnish, Guyen, now Guadalupe, and a handful of others who'd survived the years. But tonight was different. A young man stood among them, tall and unfamiliar, yet somehow known. When he turned, Sarah's breath caught. He had Kuruk's face, aged down 30 years. "This is Tomas," Dala said in Apache, her voice still strong. "Kuruk's son from his first wife. He survived Camp Grant, was raised by missionaries. He's come looking for his father's people." Sarah stared at her stepson, this ghost from Kuruk's past. Thomas studied her with equal intensity. "You're the white woman who became Apache," he said in accented Apache. "My father's second wife." "I am Itzachu," Sarah replied carefully. "Your father was a good man." "I know. The missionaries told me he died a heathen. But an old woman in Tucson, she told me different. Said he died free." Thomas's voice carried hunger for truth. "I want to know who my people are." Dala gestured for him to sit. "Then listen." They spent hours sharing stories, memories, songs barely remembered. Thomas drank it all in like a man dying of thirst. When he learned of his half-brother, his eyes lit up. I have family living family. Daniel doesn't know, Sarah said quietly, about any of this. I've protected him from the burden. Burden, Tomas frowned. Is that what we are now? We are survivors. Guyen interjected. Sometimes survival means forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering. Each chooses their path. As the gathering broke up, Thomas walked with Sarah back toward town. Will you tell me about my father, the missionaries' stories? I never believed them. So Sarah talked, sharing memories of Kuruk's gentleness, his strength, his love for both his sons. By the time they reached her shop, tears tracked down Tomas's face. Thank you, he said simply. May I meet Daniel? Sarah hesitated. She'd spent 20 years building a safe life for her son, but looking at Tomas, this piece of Kuruk returned to them. She nodded. When he returns, we'll see. The week passed slowly. Sarah found herself preparing what to say, how to explain, when Daniel finally arrived, travel-worn but smiling. She felt her courage falter. Mama! He embraced her, then pulled back to study her face. What's wrong? You look worried. Nothing's wrong, just there's someone you need to meet. She led him to the back room where Tomas waited. The half-brothers stared at each other, recognition flickering despite never having met. Daniel, Sarah said in Spanish, then switched to Apache. This is your brother. Daniel's eyes widened. He'd learned Apache at her knee, but rarely heard it spoken aloud. Brother. The story poured out then. Their father, the band, the life Daniel had never known. He listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions in his rusty Apache. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me? No accusation, just curiosity. To protect you, so you could have choices I didn't have. Daniel looked between her and Thomas. But these are my people too. Their story is my story. A dangerous story, Sarah warned. Even now. All the more reason to preserve it, Daniel said with the passion of youth. I'm studying law to help indigenous peoples. How can I do that if I deny my own blood? The brothers talked late into the night, finding commonalities despite their different paths. Thomas had become a teacher, working on the reservation. Daniel shared his dreams of changing laws that oppressed native peoples. Sarah watched them, seeing Kuruk in both faces, feeling the bittersweet joy of connections reformed. Later, alone with her thoughts. Sarah walked to the small cemetery outside town. Kuruk's grave bore only a simple cross with the name Carlos Delgado, but she knew. She knelt, placing desert flowers on the dry earth. Your sons met today, she whispered in Apache. Both strong, both seeking justice in their own ways. You would be proud. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of sage. Somewhere a coyote called, that eternal sound that connected past to present. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering. The years in San Miguel hadn't been easy. The first winter, they'd nearly starved. She'd taken in washing, served in the cantina, anything to survive while building her healing practice. There'd been times she'd wondered if surrender would have been easier than this grinding poverty. But slowly, life had improved. Her reputation as a healer grew. Daniel thrived in the Mexican school, his quick mind earning teachers' praise. When Kuruk was alive, they'd even known moments of happiness, quiet evenings when the past felt distant, when they could pretend they were just another family making their way. Now, standing in the cemetery, Sarah felt the weight of years, of stories held close, of identities layered like sediment. She was Sarah Mackenzie, rancher's daughter, Maria Delgado, curandera, Itzachu, Apache woman, all true, all partial, all part of the complex truth of a life lived between worlds. Walking home, she found Daniel and Thomas still talking, now joined by Dala. The old woman was teaching them a song, her voice cracked but determined. Sarah stood in the doorway. watching past flow into future. "It's a chew," Dala called. "Come, sing with us." Sarah joined them, adding her voice to the ancient melody. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Thomas would return to the reservation. Daniel would use his education to fight in courts rather than canyons. She would continue healing bodies while carrying memories. But tonight, in this small room in a forgotten mining town, Apache voices rose again, not in war cries or death songs, but in the quiet determination of survival, of culture preserved in fragments and whispers. When the song ended, Daniel took her hand. "Thank you, Mama, for everything, for surviving so I could exist." Sarah squeezed his fingers, thinking of all those who hadn't survived, whose children would never sing these songs. The guilt would always be there, wound into her bones, but so would the fierce joy of having preserved something precious against all odds. "We chose life," she said simply, "even when it seemed impossible." As the evening drew to a close, Sarah prepared tea with herbs Dala had taught her to mix decades ago. The four of them sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by invisible threads of kinship and culture. Finally, Dala spoke. "I am old. Soon I join the ancestors. But seeing this," she gestured at the brothers, at Sarah, "I know we did not fail. The people continue, different but unbroken. We'll teach our children." Daniel promised. "The language, the stories, everything you've preserved." "Carefully," Sarah cautioned, ever mindful of danger. "But yes, we'll teach them." Later, alone in her room, Sarah opened her medicine bundle, the one Dala had given her so long ago. Inside, among the sacred herbs and healing stones, lay a faded ribbon, a spent shell casing, a piece of turquoise Karuk had given her, fragments of a life, a love, a world transformed. She thought of her grandmother, Maria Esperanza, who'd planted the first seeds of bridge building in her heart. Would she recognize her granddaughter now? This woman who'd crossed every boundary, survived every loss, rebuilt from ashes more than once. Yes, Sarah decided, her grandmother would understand. Some women were born to live between worlds, to carry stories across borders, to love beyond the limitations others accepted. As sleep finally came, Sarah dreamed of dancing, not the formal dances of her youth or the sacred ceremonies of the Apache, but something new, a dance that wove all her selves together, all her losses and loves, creating something unique and unbreakable. In the dream, Karuk danced beside her, young and whole again. Siki was there, and Itzel, and little Shadi with her ribbon. All the lost ones moved in harmony, their faces peaceful, their steps sure. "We chose it all," Dream Karuk said, echoing her words in Apache. "Every joy, every sorrow, we chose." Sarah woke with tears on her cheeks but a smile on her lips. Through the window, dawn was breaking over the mountains. Another day, another chance to honor the dead by living fully. She rose, prepared for the day's work, the day's memories, the day's small acts of preservation. Maria Delgado, curandera, would heal the sick, but Itzachu, star in mourning, would remember and endure. The story continued, written now in law books and lesson plans, in herbs gathered and songs whispered, in the faces of two brothers who carried Apache blood into a new century. Not the ending anyone had imagined in those desperate flights through canyon and desert, but an ending nonetheless. Or perhaps, Sarah thought as she opened her shop to the morning light, not an ending at all. A transformation, a bridge built of love and loss, strong enough to carry the weight of memory into whatever future awaited. She touched the medicine bundle at her waist, spoke the morning prayer Dala had taught her, and began another day of the long survival. The Apache way changed, hidden but unbroken, always unbroken. Thank you for listening to this story. If you're hearing this tale of love and survival in the Old West, please comment below and let us know where you're listening from so we can connect with fellow story lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Kuruk's journey. Your comments help keep these forgotten stories alive.